Chapter 1. The Silence of Snow Picture. This, 40 below, a sky the color of gunmetal, and a forest so quiet you can hear your own pulse thudding inside a wool cap. No speeches, no drum roll, just a man in white standing perfectly still in a stand of birches, as if the trees had decided to grow one more. His name is Simo Häyhä, and nothing about him says legend. He's short, wiry, the kind of strength you get from hay bales and fence posts, not gym mirrors. He was a farm boy before the war, up before dawn, chores first, breakfast second. He hunted for meat, not trophies. When he squeezed a trigger, it wasn't to impress anyone. It was to put food on a table that he had built with his own hands. Then history changed the menu. In late 1939, the Soviet Union crossed the border into Finland with columns of men and metal that seemed to have no end. Finland had more pine trees than tanks, more honesty than ammunition, and a winter that would punish arrogance on either side. The world expected a quick collapse. The map said, tiny country. The calendar said, over by Christmas. But maps don't show swamps under the snow, and calendars don't list the names of men who won't give up their home. Simo joined the defense like he did everything else, quietly. No promises, no prophecy, just another rifle in a line of men wearing uniforms that looked suspiciously like the clothes they'd worn yesterday. But he brought something precious to a winter war, patience measured in hours, and an eye that could find a rabbit's ear at 200 yards between drifting flakes. He worked with a simple, iron-sighted bolt-action no-shiny scope to fog up or catch the sun and betray him. Before first light, he'd walk in a wide arc through the forest, careful to leave no obvious track to his nest. He'd pack snow in front of the muzzle so a shot wouldn't throw up a telltale puff. He'd press a pinch of snow under his tongue to cool his breath, so the cold wouldn't paint it into the air like a signal flare. Then he'd disappear, sometimes 20 yards from a trail, sometimes 200 becoming part of the landscape that had raised him. If you've never waited in the cold, truly waited, it's hard to explain what happens to time. Minutes don't tick, they stretch. The only sounds are your own heartbeat and the distant bark of an engine that never seems to get closer. Your fingers, jammed into wool, learn a new alphabet pressure, release, pressure again, while your mind rehearses the same two rules. Don't move, and don't lie to yourself about what you see. This is where Simo lived, between breaths and branches. He studied routines the way farmers study weather, where the enemy liked to warm their hands, where a path dipped behind a boulder, where an officer's cap rose a little higher than the rest. He didn't daydream about glory. He thought about angles, temperature, and how snow can trick the eye into thinking a man is taller or nearer than he is. The cold was an enemy that spared no one, but it was an honest one. It punished the careless and rewarded the prepared. Simo kept his rifle cold so metal and wood would agree with each other when it mattered. He built a low rest from ice and packed snow steady, silent, disposable. He learned to see color the way a hawk sees motion, the faintest smear of dark wool against white, the blink of a man who forgot that even blinking can shine. None of this looks like heroism from a distance. It looks like a man not moving. It sounds like nothing at all. But in the arithmetic of a winter war, stillness is not the absence of action. It's a weapon. Every hour Simo held a stretch of forest alone was an hour his platoon didn't die trying to retake it. Every decision he made in the cold wait, not yet, now rippled backward through the line, buying time for men he would never meet. He wasn't mystical about it. He didn't carry lucky charms or speeches. He carried discipline. Eat enough. Dry your socks by the stove when you can. Oil freezes, judgment shouldn't. The old hunting lessons turned into wartime doctrine. Don't chase a bad opportunity just because you're bored, and don't ignore a good one because your fingers hurt. There's a kind of leadership that doesn't shout, doesn't wave anyone forward. It just removes problems from the world, one decision at a time. That's what Simo did in those early weeks along a frozen river with a name most outsiders couldn't pronounce. Patrols went out and didn't come back the same. Officers learned to duck in places they used to stroll. And the men beside Simo began to realize that the quiet farmer with the steady hands wasn't just surviving the winter, he was shaping it. Was he fearless? No. Fear is a winter tool. It keeps you from doing the dumb thing that gets you found. But he was immune to hurry. The forest set the pace, and he kept it. If a day offered nothing, he took nothing and went home. If a minute offered everything, he took it and left before the echo finished bouncing off the trees. You can learn a lot about a man by what he does in the cold, when there's no crowd and no immediate reward. Some break into pieces too small to pick up. Some get mean to stay warm. Simo did neither. He got smaller, in the best senseless ego, less motion, less waste, until he was just purpose and breath and the thin click of a bolt. By the time the enemy realized something was wrong in that stretch of forest, that the snow itself seemed to be against them, it was too late to explain it away as bad luck. Tracks vanished where they should have continued. Voices fell quiet without a shout. Someone out there was taking responsibility for a piece of ground with a thoroughness that felt personal. And then, as soldiers do, they gave the unknown a name that travels faster than facts. A name whispered in tents and shouted over engines. A name to blame when men didn't return. They called him the White Death. Next, we'll step closer into the techniques, the psychology, and the long winter days when one farmer's discipline turned into a legend. Chapter 2. The White Death War gives birth to myths, but Simo Häyhä didn't set out to be one. He set out each morning the same way he always had, early, quiet, and with a rifle in his hands. The difference now was that every decision could tilt a battlefield. Simo's weapon wasn't fancy. It was a plain Finnish M28 rifle, iron sights, no scope. He didn't want glass to fog or flash. The Soviets came with tanks, artillery, and thousands of men. He came with stillness, snow, and patience. And in the arithmetic of a winter war, his equation worked. He'd slip into position before dawn, packing down snow so his nest wouldn't sink, biting a mouthful of ice to keep his breath invisible in the freezing air. He became the forest motionless, silent, waiting. For hours he would watch, studying the rhythm of enemy patrols, the careless step of an officer, the way a man shifted his rifle when he was cold. Simo didn't chase targets. He let targets chase routine. And when the moment came, it was fast. A single crack in the cold, then silence again. By the time echoes faded, Simo was already gone, leaving nothing but a line of footprints swallowed by snow. The Soviets began to realize something was different. Men disappeared where there should have been safety. Officers dropped in the middle of sentences. Entire patrols returned shaken, whispering about a ghost they never saw. Soon, one name spread faster than bullets. The White Death. Think about that. An army of nearly 1 million men invades, and yet they focus their fear on one farmer from a border village. That's the power of precision. That's the psychology of war. One man forcing thousands to second-guess every step, every shadow, every tree line. Simo didn't count kills the way stories later would. Numbers belonged to journalists and generals. What mattered to him was ground held, comrades protected, and time bought. Still, records tell us he may have taken over 500 enemy lives in just 100 days. That's not just efficiency. That's discipline weaponized. But it wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about mindset. He never allowed arrogance. He never decorated himself with speeches. He respected the enemy enough to study them carefully, but never so much as to fear them. Where others saw impossible odds, Simo saw work to be done, one target, 1 hour, 1 day at a time. Soldiers on both sides learned the same truth. The cold is merciless, but men can be worse. And in the winter of 1939, the worst thing the Red Army could imagine was the invisible Finn in white camouflage, waiting with ice in his lungs and steel in his hands. The fear spread so deeply that the Soviets deployed counter-snipers and artillery just to hunt him down. Entire bombardments were ordered on whispers of his presence. Imagine the math of that. Thousands of shells, hundreds of men, all spent on one farmer. That's when you know the legend has already won. Yet Simo remained calm. He knew the forest better than his pursuers. He knew patience better than officers trained in rush and numbers. And while the enemy kept looking for a ghost, he remained what he always was, a man who knew his land, his rifle, and himself. In war, some victories are loud cities captured, bridges blown. Others are quiet, an enemy too afraid to walk in daylight. Simo gave Finland those quiet victories, day after day, until his very name became a weapon. Chapter 3. The last shot. Legends don't end in silence. They end in a test. For Simo Häyhä, that test came in March 1940. The Winter War had burned for 3 brutal months. The Soviets had thrown everything they could into the forests, and Finland was still standing. But the price was heavy, and no man, not even the White Death, could escape forever. It happened on a frozen day near the Kola front. Simo was in position, doing what he always did, waiting, calm, patient. But the Red Army had learned. They brought their own snipers, desperate to erase the ghost haunting their lines. One round found him. It struck his face, tearing through his jaw. The man who had vanished into snow hundreds of times was suddenly dragged into the light, bleeding and broken. For most men, that would be the end of the story. But not for Simo. He didn't die. He didn't even surrender. He lost consciousness, yes, but when he awoke days later, the war was nearly over, and Finland still held the line. His service had already become legend. The scar never left him. His face bore the mark of that bullet for the rest of his life. But scars are not symbols of weakness. They're proof of survival. And survival was the core of Simo's philosophy. He never sought fame. He never bragged about numbers. When asked about his role, he answered simply, "I only did what I was told, as well as I could." After the war, he returned not to parades or politics, but to the life he had always known. Farming, hunting, silence. A man who had been feared by thousands went back to milking cows and walking forests with his rifle, not for glory, but for food. He lived quietly, into his 90s, long enough to see Finland free, long enough to see himself turned into legend. And here's the thing about Simo Häyhä's story. It's not about killing. It's about discipline. It's about the strength of a man who understood his place, accepted his duty, and carried it without excuses. For men listening now, decades later, what's the lesson? It's not that you need to be a sniper. It's that you need to be ready. Ready to do the hard thing when no one is watching. Ready to wait, to endure, to strike only when it matters. Ready to carry scars without letting them define you. Because life, like war, tests you in silence. It doesn't announce the moment when your patience will pay off, or when your courage will be required. It just asks, are you steady? Can you hold? Will you act when it's your turn? Simo Häyhä answered those questions not with speeches, but with action, in snow, in silence, with nothing but a rifle and an iron will. And that's why his name still carries weight. Not because he was the White Death, but because he was the living proof that one disciplined man can bend the course of history. When you wake tomorrow, remember this. You don't need a battlefield to live like Simo. You need a standard. Do your work, respect your tools, carry your scars, and when your moment comes, because it will be ready to take the shot,